everyone. I'm Brad Bough, and welcome to another episode of the Indiana History Project. Today we are very fortunate. We have over 112 years of educational experience in the North Lawrence Community School System sitting here at the table with us. Our very special guests today are Mr. Gary Holmes and Mr. Don White. Also acting as a guest and as a co-host today will be Lee Hutchinson. Lee, you were an educator for 37 years in the county, is that correct?
That's right.
And how long did you lead the schools as a principal, different schools?
Well, if you had Lincoln School up there, Old Lincoln was where I went to school. And then I came back and became a teacher at Lincoln. Then I became a principal at Lincoln. Then they closed Lincoln. They built a new Lincoln School. This building is a sister to the Stalker building. If you want to bring up the Stalker building, they were both built in 1892. So my claim to fame is that I closed the old Lincoln, and then years later I moved into Stalker School and closed it. And so that's when they told me to retire. So we have New Lincoln and New Stalker, and very few people in the county know about Old Lincoln, especially because it sat where the Bedford Fire Station now sits. We had a half block, beautiful stone building. It was a sister building to Stalker. Stalker is being rebuilt. Stalker will be saved because it's being restored as an apartment building. And I predict people will drive for miles to see an old school building because they just don't build them out of limestone anymore.
Now, Lee, you served during World War II. Is that how you got your educational background to become an educator?
Oh, yes, a GI Bill. You had to use, the GI Bill saved everything. I mean, after World War II, everybody got to go to college. Because after World War I, there was no pension or anything, and the veterans really suffered. They even marched on Washington. But during World War II, the Senate said, we're going to have an education bill. And as a result, our country blossomed with engineers and teachers and lawyers and doctors and et cetera.
And where did you go to school at, Lee?
It was all Lincoln, college.
College, yes.
Indiana University.
Indiana University?
Yeah. I got 3 degrees from IU.
What degrees do you have, Lee?
No, it's a bachelor, the master's, and what do they call it?
Specialist.
A specialist degree. I couldn't get a doctorate to name it a specialist, so I could put on Band-Aids.
Well, there again we have it, how important education is, and his service to the nation during World War II is what allowed him to obtain that education and become an educator here in Lawrence County. Mr. White, you were an educator for 40 years, is that correct?
That's correct.
Would you highlight where you went to school at to start with?
Yes, I went to high school, Huron High School. Over here in high school, it burned a few years after I left there. Then from there went on to Indiana State University, or Indiana State College at that time, and got my degree there in industrial education and physical education. Then went back there and got my master's in industrial education. Never really thought about administration at all until reorganization came along, and on a Sunday night, well, Bill Luce was principal. I was at that time I was teaching at Oleitic, and Bill Luce was principal there, and he came to me in about 1964, somewhere along there, and said, would you be interested in the head basketball coach here at Oleitic, because the coach was leaving. And I said, well, Bill, I don't think so. I think I've got children I hardly ever get to see because I'd been coaching for several years, and I said, I'd kind of like to be with my children some. Well, he said, we've got something else to offer you. And he said, I'd kind of like for you to be my assistant. That was in probably 64. My assistant, he was the principal there at Oleitic. And not knowing what he knew probably, I said, I came back a few days later. I said, I want to talk to my wife, and came back a few days later, and I accepted that position. But he said, we've got a problem. since you're an industrial arts teacher, we can't hire industrial arts teachers, and about half my schedule was industrial arts, and so he said, you're still going to have to teach the industrial arts, and as long as being my assistant. So they did hire someone, and I also taught driver education, so they did hire someone to take my driver education classes. And so I went through that year till January, and on Sunday night, right, the 1st of January, I guess the North Lawrence School Board had organized, and I hadn't been listening to the radio, but the PTO president called me on Sunday night. He asked me a question about the PTO meeting the next night. I said, why are you asking me? And he said, well, you're the principal at Olettic High School. I said, I am? He said, the board has just met and appointed you as the acting principal for the rest of this year. So that's the way I got into administration. Then I really didn't have a principal's license at that time, so I had taken some administrative courses, not really thinking I was going into it, because I got my master's in my teaching field because I enjoyed that so much. So they hired a principal then for the next year because I didn't have a principal's license, and they came to me during Bill Leaf's again. He moved into the central office, and he came to me and said, if you would like to be principal, you need to get ready for it. So I went back to IU that summer and took 15 hours, took the principal's job then in 66. That was in 66, and during the summer of 66 I took 15 hours, enough to get my provisional principal's license. I'd go to class in the morning, come back to the school and work on scheduling till 5 or 6 o'clock, and then go home and study the rest of the night, and back the next day till I got my 15 hours in. So that's kind of the way my administrative license came along. And then, of course, I finished that up later in postgraduate work. I finished that up so that I got my professional license that way. But I taught at Fayetteville. Of course, went to high school here and taught at Fayetteville for 2 years, and then moved to Olettic and taught the industrial arts classes and some physical ed classes and drivers. And I started driver education both at Fayetteville and Olettic.
Started driver's ed in
Yeah,
2 schools.
2 schools. And started out with old Army surplus cars. We rebuilt them for driver education cars, and then finally...
The industrial arts degree comes in handy there.
Yes. So that's kind of the way I got into this education.
Who was the principal at Fayetteville when you taught there?
Claude Marsh.
Claude Marsh.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
He was there only 2 years. I think he left there when I left. So I left and went to Olettic after that.
Now, Gary, you had 35 years in as an
35 years, that's
educator?
correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where are some of the places, well, where did you go to school at to start
Well,
with to get you on your way to obtaining your degree to be an educator?
I went to Needmore High School and elementary school. Of course, at that particular time, we didn't have any preschool, and there was no kindergarten either. But I went to Needmore grade 1 through 12. And I felt like that my best chance to go to college was try to get a basketball scholarship. So I worked hard through high school trying to get as good as I could, and I got a basketball scholarship to West Virginia, and went to West Virginia in the fall of '61, and really enjoyed it down there. So I did some work down there. Of course, when you're away out of state like that, I wanted to go into teaching and coaching, but when you go to out of state, you don't meet all the requirements for the state that you want to teach in. So I came back and took some classes at Oakland City to get my required Indiana license. So I got my BS from Oakland City in history, all social studies, history, geography, economics, covered several courses. And I got my master's degree
at Indiana State University in social studies and physical education and health. So my first teaching job was at Paola in the fall of '65, and I was on the basketball coaching staff and taught U.S. history and driver's ed, and I was at Paola 8 years. While there, I taught health, physical education, coached track, coached cross country. After 8 years, my family had an unfortunate accident with my brother being killed, and he was teaching and coaching at Eastern Green. So I was called to go to Eastern Green. Some of the players down there that he had on his team and some of those parents came to me and wanted to know if I would come down there and take the position that he had. So I hated to leave Paola, but I felt called to go to Eastern. And I was there 3 years, varsity basketball coach, athletic director, cross-country coach, driver ed teacher, and a junior U.S. history teacher. So I was busy at that particular time. And our children were small, and I didn't get to see them very often at all while they were awake. So I wanted to come back home, closer to home. So as a matter of fact, Mr. White was influential in providing a position up here for me. He was the principal at Olytic at that time. This was just the junior high at that time. There was an opening in history and coaching. A gentleman from Brownstown, I believe, retired. And Mr. White put in a good word for me in '76, I guess it would have been. And so I came to Olytic. And during the summertime, that's whenever he left Olytic to go to the central office. So I never got to work for Mr. White, but I certainly did appreciate him helping me land the position there. So I was at Olytic, 8th grade, U.S. history and Indiana history for 24 years and retired in 2000. So that gave me 35 years altogether. And in 2002, I kind of got out of the oven and back in the skillet. I ran for the school board here, and I've been on the school board for the past 10 and a half years. So I value education. I wanted to stay connected to the schools and to the students, and the school board tied that link for myself, to stay involved. And I enjoy about 99% of that position as on the board and as the board president at the present time.
Schools in Lawrence County have been a major effort for the citizens living here. And we started out, I think in 1831, we had a log cabin school down in Bedford. We had, a little later, Leesville High School was one of the best in the state. We had 101 one or two one-room schools in Lawrence County.
100?
101.
101.
Wow.
Wow.
I got ready for this program in 1968. I wrote this program out of the minutes of school board. But they list the schools by townships. And the township trustee was the head Fred, but they did have a county superintendent. And the county superintendent went from building to building by horse and buggy. He investigated the schools and tested the teachers, and then he had to stay overnight with the trustee or somebody else. The teachers had to do the same thing. Most of the teachers went out and boarded with one of the patrons, the trustee or somebody, and then took a horse and buggy over to school or walked over to the school. So the one-room schools, 101 one-room schools back in 1885, 86. So we grow into that. So you see, the three of us now have, the teachers work for $1.75 a day, and the superintendent got $5.50 a day. But the point of it was, no matter what happened, they wanted education. People would start schools, like the farmer down by one of the townships, he had 7 kids, so he started his own school and hired somebody to come in and teach. And the teachers would, for room and board, and then $1.85 a day, that would get them by. They could at least exist, So sitting here now, we have 3 guys, including myself, who didn't see the horse and buggy. But I can remember one of my teachers telling me that she used to go by horse and buggy out at Vinegar Hill School. And so we kept consolidating and shrinking down and shrinking down. And by the time we started teaching, we ended up with the township trustees running the school system, and each one had a high school. And so we would have our own sectional right here in Bedford. It's kind of amazing how it all came together. And then after the trustees, eventually money forced the closing of the township schools, and we now have a Bedford North Lawrence system and a Mitchell system. But it's amazing when you go back through the history and had time to look at it. We've had academies. We had the Southern Indiana Normal Academy at Mitchell, and we had Dawker Academy and the Bedford Teaching Academy in Bedford, and et cetera. Little guys with just individual businessmen would start a little school, And where Southern Indiana Normal couldn't have a team because the cheerleaders would be yelling, sin, sin, sin.
Like he says, the trustee really was in control.
The trustee had.
And back then, when you got a job, you went and negotiated with the trustee. And I remember negotiating with the trustee on one occasion. When I came out of college, the industrial arts teachers were very scarce. And so I got a premium. I got above what the other teachers got because of that area, and that was the only reason. And so that, of course, that has changed over the years, and I don't guess they even teach industrial arts now anymore, so, or at least in very few cases. So
it was an amazing system, but now Gary is the head of the whole thing. I worked in the ad building when they were building this building and most of the other buildings. I started with the vocational building, and then we just kept building buildings and buildings, and we ended up with this one. And then Don was the director of personnel. Gary was in the midst of all of it, in the teaching and coaching level. And so we've seen it go from one-room schools at the corner of each section, maybe, and to today, this modern system we have, and ends up that Gary's the head of it. He's president of the school boards.
These trustees had a lot of power and authority. They did the hiring and firing of teachers, bus drivers, custodial staff, cooks, pretty much everybody in the school system. And of course, I'm sure I know that there were a lot of good people, good teachers, good this, good that were replaced through favoritism of a newly elected trustee.
Political spoils.
Very, very much so. Very much so.
Now, sometimes you made a payback.
Yeah.
You get the job.
Yeah.
One of the advantages I had, I never worked in the school system that I taught in. I never lived in the school system that I taught in during that time, so I didn't get involved in the politics.
Yeah. But the trustee decided who the schools would buy, for an example, their coal from,
Right.
their fuel from, and all these things.
So no bid contracts, in other words.
Well, possibly not, but you could see people warming up to a newly elected trustee. And I remember basketball coaches were hired and fired as new trustees would come into their positions. Some maybe fair treatment, some extremely unfair, I think. I experienced one of those incidents myself when I was a junior in high school. We Needmore had the trustee system. So it's by far much better today where you have a group of people that gives the authority to the superintendent, and the superintendent gives authority to the principals, and this political system has hopefully been eliminated.
And you have all kinds of laws requiring bids.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
getting
Correct.
the state took in
Yeah, yeah.
and stabilized a lot of it.
Absolutely.
But the thing I remember about the schools, the high schools that we had, was the spirit that they had in the basketball section.
Yeah.
And all year long, and the paper was just full of, Williams Bulldog does this, Huron Beavers does this. I can't, what are the names of some of those teams?
Yeah, yeah.
What do you got? You got, Tunnelton was
Indians.
Indians, okay, Heltonville,
Blue Jackets,
Springville.
Hornets.
Hornets.
This is a good this is a good test. I know the Needmore, they're the
Hilltoppers.
Needmore were the Hilltoppers. Shawswick were Farmers. Old Lick had the Bearcats. Bedford Stonecutters and Mitchell Blue Jackets.
Fayetteville Lions.
Fayetteville Lions.
Fayetteville Lions. I miss Fayetteville now.
Yeah.
Very good.
But before we go to extracurricular, basketball in particular, I think I would like to mention the fact that in these small early county schools that we had, we didn't have the advantage of having much at all in the way of the arts, the fine arts. I remember at Needmore, and most schools, I think, had a very solid group of academic teachers and elementary teachers. But being as close to IU as we were, it seemed as though we had a lot of turnover in home ec, industrial tech or shop at that time, art and music. It seemed as though most of the time those teachers were hired just for knowing they were going to be here just a year or two while their spouse finished their degree at IU. And then when their husband normally would finish their degree at IU, they would pack on and pack up and move on to a more permanent place. So our elementary teachers and academic teachers at Needmore were very stable, and that was great for us. But the specialists, we had a lot of turnover there and not a great deal of consistency. And of course the small schools they did not have the finances to offer any foreign language. And of course that handicapped us when we got into college. At that time, of course, there were no such thing as college SAT scores and those prerequisites to enter college. But Lee mentions sports, of course. There was just so much rivalry between the local schools at that particular time in the 50s and 60s and part of the 70s. It was a great time to grow up. The 50s and the 60s, I still feel like, was a great time for children to grow up. Sports was the heart of the school and the heart of the communities. And these communities were close together. People were related from community to community, from school to school. You went to church with these people, you saw them at the grocery store, you had family gatherings with them, and the rivalry was just really wonderful. And we had a county tournament, basketball tournament. That would be Fayetteville, Huron, Williams, Tunnelton, Heltonville, Needmore. Am I leaving out any?
That was it.
We had the county tournament in basketball yearly, and of course that was a lot of good rivalry. And then we had the sectional. And see, at that particular time, there were 12 teams, 12 schools that came up here to Bedford for the sectional. Paola came up here, Mitchell was up here, Orleans was up here, Shawswick, Olytic, and then these county schools. So it was a 12-team sectional. And that ran nearly day and night, starting when on...
It started
Thursday night usually.
Well, maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday night, and a lot of times there you had 2 games in the afternoon, and then 2 games at night. So you had 12 teams, you had 11 games.
And that gymnasium, the Bedford gym was packed. People standing outside waiting for somebody to leave.
Yeah, it was a rocking place.
I used to take the tickets, and one time they were wanting to come in so badly that they pushed the hinges off, tore the door off the hinges.
Yeah. And most of the
And
county...
usually at sectional time, you'd have a real deep snow.
Yeah.
Sectional blizzard.
Nearly every year.
Of course, there's always demand for sectional tickets. I know at Olytic, when I was principal at Olytic, we'd get around 400. Of course, we'd have 1,000, 1,500 wanting to go to the game, you know, and so you really had to be careful how you distributed those tickets too, because if that could get you a job, that could lose you a job if you weren't careful.
Yeah, it's scalping for high school tickets.
There was just such good rivalry. Now, for an example, of course, Needmore and Olytic, they were great rivals. And other schools were great rivals too, but I remember there in the mid-'60s, Olytic had a very good basketball team, and so did Needmore. And the game was supposed to be played at Olytic, which had a fairly good-sized seating capacity. But they were anticipating so many people there that the gym wouldn't hold them. So they moved the game to Bedford.
Which team put out Bedford? One of the teams put out Bedford that
Olytic.
year. Olytic put out Bedford.
Well, 2 years, they put out Bedford 2 years
2 years in a row.
And I remember there were some college scouts here that night that came to watch Olytic and Needmore play. And of course, see, the thing about it, this was before the new Highway 37 was opened up. And of course, the rivalry was so good and intense. The Needmore people, of course, had to travel through Olytic to get back home.
And Olytic had a town marshal.
Yeah. but if Olytic would win the ball game, a lot of their fans and students and so on would be up there along the sidewalk and in the Olytic school parking lot cheering and so on for themselves as the Needmore fan bus and team bus and patrons would drive through Olytic. And if Needmore won the ball game, a lot of times there would be a few Olytic students and citizens, maybe they're standing by the sidewalk throwing eggs or something like that at the Needmore buses. They would pass through. Remember that? Yeah. So, but it was a good deal, and I'll mention this because all these people have gone on now, but today in athletics there is a lot of recruiting, even in high school. I think we all realize that. But back in the 50s and 60s, this was a complete no-no. And if the IHSAA found out that there was possible recruiting violations, they stepped in and boy, they lowered the boom on you. Yeah. They would really throw the hammer at you. And I remember I played ball and my younger brother was coming up, and I think everybody realized he was just going to be a sensational player. And our father had some serious physical issues and could only work as a guard or a night watchman. And he worked for the Indiana Limestone Company. And there were some diehard Olytic fans who were in charge of a lot of the authority of the Indiana Limestone Company, hiring and firing. And I was not there at this meeting, but some of the Olytic loyals came to my mom and dad and encouraged mom and dad to move to Olytic. And in fact, nearly, in so many words, threatened my father with his job if he did not move and bring myself and my younger brother to Olytic to play ball. And I know it really worried mom and dad, because I remember hearing them talk lowly of a night or whatever, whether they should move to Olytic or not to preserve his job as a night watchman for the Limestone Company. And you know these names I'm probably referring to.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, well, there aren't, maybe no one else around is aware of that except myself and maybe sister and brother now. But they put the pressure on my father. But after thinking about that quite a while, he said no. He said, he called my mom Ursi. He said, Ursi, we're not going to do it. He said, this is our home. Needmore's our school. I may get fired, I may lose my job, but we're not going to play this political game.
And in 1964, that was rewarded. That was the Hilltoppers' only sectional win,
right,
correct?
Yeah, right.
And
That's
your
right,
brother basically anchored that team.
Yes, yes. And really, I think if he were combined with the Olytic group, that would have been a sensational team, because Olytic had some great players too. I mean, they had a great team. But they were looking, those people were looking for sectional, regional, maybe semi-state appearances. But that's just how the way it was. And I remember the IHSAA got involved in a recruitment violation at Seymour. You guys may remember this, the brothers, the Stevenson brothers.
I remember the names.
And the news of that recruitment leaked out, and the IHSAA got involved, and boy, they put a halt to that in a minute. But those basketball fans, they would arrive at the gym long before the game time, and they would sit there or stand there and wait in cold weather. Couldn't wait to get through that gym door and get up there in their seating area and get relaxed and get psyched up for the ball game.
It was amazing. One thing I liked about those old schools was that very thing you're talking about. It was a small school that had all the spirit, and the teachers knew every kid.
Yeah, right.
And they knew every wrong move he made, and they knew their ability.
Yeah.
And they really, the teacher could really bear down and had full cooperation of the parents in nearly all cases.
What I enjoyed too, because like on a Saturday, you could go to town, as a player, you could go to town and you could see 2 or 3 boys walking down the street with their honor jackets on, and if they were red and white, you knew, well, they're some of the Tunnelton players. And you pretty well knew them as friends.
Yeah.
And if you saw the Fayetteville jackets, you thought, well, they're so-and-so and so-and-so. We played against them last night. So, and this friendship there that developed as high school through athletics, this friendship remains the rest of your life. I see guys that I played against and with, and we go back and we reminisce and we talk about those times, and it's just a wonderful experience.
You talk about the teams. Well, in fact, one of the players on that Old League team that he was, probably the one he's talking about, was there. Of course, we could seat about 15 to 1,800 in the Old League gym, and that wouldn't be good to hold the number of people wanting to come and see. That was when Danny Bush, who coached here and went on and took the Bedford North Lawrence and won a state tourney with them. So when he was on the team there at Old League. So that's the reason every time that Bedford didn't have a home game and we had a home game during that year, we'd move it to Bedford just so we could take care of the fans that were wanting to see the game.
Yeah.
That's how, and I would get phone calls from not people just in Lawrence County, but from all over the state and even out of the state wanting to come and see those games. That's how much basketball was king in Lawrence County for that period of time. And of course, even after that, we went through the Damon Bailey era here, you see, and I know I was director of personnel for the school system at that time and came out here, and Ray Manis was the athletic director, and I happened to be down in his office, and he said, I got a call from someone in the state of Washington today wanting to know if we'd have tickets to get in for him to get in and see the ball game tonight. And,
I had a call one time from Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Wanted to get in.
Well, I had at the state finals. I was sitting there by a fellow from, I think he's from Pennsylvania. He said, I'd heard of Danny Bush and had never seen him, but I just wanted, and of course that was the largest, I guess, state finals ever.
41,000.
And so he came all the way from Pennsylvania to see Indiana basketball player.
But nearly every one of our schools had good players.
Yeah.
I could just go right down the list. Tunnelton and Heltonville and Fayetteville and right on down the list. At one time or another, they all had some exceptional players. And in a small school like that, of course, you didn't have 5 or 6 or 7 that could compete on the level that the other larger schools competed on. And of course, at that time, we didn't have class basketball. There was just one state tournament. Of course, that made it so interesting too, and I guess the jury still hasn't decided whether the state made a good decision going to the class system or not. But, you know, I think all of our schools, they tried to put on a little bit of baseball, and a little bit of track, a little bit of cross country to kind of entertain the players and the runners. But the facilities were never here for that. Money was never there for that, you know, to equip. So basically those minor sports, or what we were referred to as minor sports, just kind of took a back seat to basketball.
Yeah, we didn't start, Bedford didn't have football team till way into the 50s.
Right, yeah.
You know, we've been talking about sports, but he mentioned that the foreign languages. I guess I was lucky going to Huron. That was a very small school. I was able to take both Latin and Spanish.
Really?
And in fact, when I went to Olytic, then some of the students from Needmore would transfer to Olytic so they could get the Latin, because we had the Latin teacher. And so that happened quite often. And I know, of course, like Gary mentioned, we were limited. I know at Huron, the math teacher often didn't stay very long. You know, they could get better jobs elsewhere. And so my younger brother, he was interested in becoming an engineer, going to Purdue to become an engineer. In fact, he was finally selected for the GM project that they had here, where they would provide him, but he'd already enrolled at Purdue and decided to stay there. So Huron didn't offer some of the advanced math courses. So what he did in high school, he went to IU and took a high school math course, trigonometry, and then came back his senior year, and they had hired a math teacher. She wasn't strong in math, so he helped teach the trigonometry class his senior year that they offered there. And since he was wanting to be an engineer, I was teaching drafting at Olytic at the time, and they didn't have the drafting at Huron, so he took the same course I offered at Olytic. He took it at Huron. I graded his papers and sent them back to them, and he got credit for it at Huron. That's
sort of makeshift.
Yeah, so that's someone like him that knew what he wanted to do. He had decided a long time ago he wanted to be an engineer. In fact, he became an engineer for Ford Motor Company and was there.
That's something else. I'll tell you, we've got to get around to show and tell after a while. I get to go first.
Go ahead. We'll talk about some of the memorabilia we have here in front of us. Lee, you go ahead and explain that.
Old Lincoln School, I'm older than these guys, a little bit. In fact, Gary's wife, I had her in my first year I taught. Jeannie was in my sixth grade class. This is the handbell from Lincoln School. And when I was teaching there, the teacher still used this. No, I'm sorry. When I was a student there, the principal had to come out and ring a bell. But we had no electric bell. We had electricity in the building, but we didn't have an electric bell for the playground. So here's the little principal to come out ringing that bell. And it's the original Lincoln School bell. And that's one of my antiques.
That is the original Lincoln School bell.
That's the bell that Mrs. Iris Robb rang for 30 or 40 years.
And it's even got a crack in it.
It's got a crack welded, yeah. So the old schools are gone.
That's a first here.
The new schools, like I said, we all had a part in bringing about the new schools and the facilities we have today. Just amazing. But now these guys have got, Don, you bought your book?
Yes. In fact, I was just looking here. Here's talking about sports, here's our record in my senior year, and there's my wife as the cheerleader.
Hasn't changed at all, has
she? And I don't remember just what the record was. Since Gary's here, we did beat Needmore 56-42 that year, so that changed over the years later.
The game must have been played at Huron.
Probably was. No, it was away. It was away. So.
Well, you can look through the old yearbooks at the county museum, and they've got all the basketball schedules right there in them, just like Mr. White's showing here.
I had, of course, I went to school here, and then taught at Fayetteville, and then to Olynyk, and I had yearbooks from each year. And so we had such an accumulation. We had moved a couple, 3 times. My wife said, we've got to do something with these yearbooks. So the old Olynyk yearbooks that I had, I took them to the museum at Olynyk and let them have them. So they're there. So if anyone wants to go to the Olynyk Museum, they can see the yearbooks there that I had.
You know, you mentioned the bell there, Lee. It's been good that I guess most of our old schools that have been torn down, those bells were saved. And I know down at Springville, for an example, the old bell is out front there in a big display case. The Needmore bell is in a display case out there.
Well, the Leesville bell, after the high school burned down, somebody salvaged the bell.
Yeah.
And they have it out at the Leesville Community Center, which used to be a school. Yeah. It used to be a 2-room school. Both my great uncles taught there. Yeah. But it's amazing the history that we try to preserve something, you know. Yeah. Try to preserve it. It's somewhere you can find it.
Yeah.
You know a little bit about the history in Spice Valley Township, where Huron was. Of course, that was the only, I guess maybe the only township that had 2 high schools, Williams and Huron. So there's a great rivalry there.
Oh, yeah.
And so, of course, the Huron school burned. And you know who was blamed for the school being burned? It was someone from Williams. Then later on, the Williams school burned. No, it's reversed. Williams school burned first. And so they came to Huron for a while. And then the Huron school burned, and of course, like vice versa, they were blamed. When the Huron school burnt, people from Williams were blamed. When the Williams school burnt, the people from Huron were blamed.
And now Spice Valley's probably the only township in the county that has students going to 2 different high schools.
Right.
Yeah, they do.
The river was a division.
Yeah. Well, Springville had a high school when I was first in school.
Oh, yeah.
They had it. Springville was there.
Right down there by the little creek, right across the bridge. Of course.
That started out of Spring Creek Academy. The Shorts and the Armstrong started that.
Yeah. Of course, the gym is still there. It has been preserved, and it's in fairly decent shape, used for community activities and gatherings and things like that. And that's also one of the that's the voting place, I believe.
I think it is.
Yeah, pretty sure it is.
You know, when Huron school burned, my youngest brother was a senior, I believe, that year, and so what they did, people in town donated their garages, the churches, and so forth. That's where he went to school his senior year, was in garages, churches, and so forth. They just move around town from one class to another. That's the way he went to high school his senior year, and then left and went on to Purdue.
They were determined they weren't going to Williams.
Right.
No, they wouldn't.
Mr. Holmes, you brought some memorabilia. You want to talk about what you brought in here today?
I did, Brad. I brought in a pair of Converse All-Star tennis shoes. Now those do go back to the 60s. And that was the typical shoe right there for, I guess, athletes throughout Indiana.
What goes around comes around.
Yeah.
I'm wearing them today. Again, not necessarily athletes, but...
Canvas, probably at that particular time in the 60s, they might have cost $3.95 or so.
At Ideal Sporting Goods?
You got 2 pair of them.
Gus Durner. We got 2 pair. We got 1 pair as the season started to practice in. And then about Christmas time, we would get a new pair to wear the last part of the season. And our coach would always instruct us, after we would break our new pair in around Christmas time, we were to save that pair only for games. So we used our old pair for practices and our new pair for games so they would look nice and white. But, you know, today I guess it would be sort of an embarrassment for athletes if the coach would say, boys, well, here's our tennis shoes this year, because they're expecting Air Jordans or colorful leather that are spring-loaded and all this. It cost about $140 or $150 a pair. So I can just see kids snickering if they were given these as their tennis shoes. And in fact, our coaches wouldn't let us wear low cuts. They felt like at that particular time that was going to lead to more sprained ankles. So they required us to wear the high tops and lace them up tight. And I brought in a trophy here this was the typical size of a high school trophy that a player might win for rebounding or free throw or assist or MVP or something of that nature. And I just wanted to sort of show how the size of that would compare to today's modern high school trophies, which would probably be up about here someplace. So as time has gone on, awards have become much larger and much more decorative and so on. And
Well, Mr. Holmes, what'd you win that trophy for?
I believe that was free throw shooting.
So it took you a whole year of concentration and practice and effort for that
right.
trophy.
That's right. I was determined, when I got to be a sophomore, I was determined I was going to carry home some hardware at honor days. And like I said earlier, I felt like this was my best door to walk through to go to college. So I worked hard on the playground, out in the back pasture, down to Avoca Court, on free throws and rebounding and so on and so forth. So actually, through the summer months and through the winter months, pretty much year-round, I worked to get trophies like that for rebounding and free throws. And I remember we had a basketball goal out in the back, out behind the barn, on a light pole that public service gave us. And it was just nailed up there, basically. And I remember going out there in cold weather when it would be so cold that you would lose air out of the ball and you couldn't hardly dribble it. And I'd go back in the house and lay that ball on top of the coal stove and let it accumulate some more air, and then go back out and play some more for 30 minutes or so with gloves on many times. It'd lose air again. I'd come back and go through the same process. But I love playing basketball by myself or with other people. So people who worked hard to achieve, whether it's academically, Brad, or craftsmanship that they spend their time on, music, the arts, they all feel good about it after they've had success at it.
I think there's a lesson to be learned in what Mr. Holmes just said, that where there's a will, there's a way. If you really want to go to college, you can find a way to do it, whether it's through basketball or another sport nowadays. The young ladies, certainly basketball is an option for them, where in you fellas' day, it just wasn't. Softball's another option. I just watched the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
So there's many options. If you are interested in college, you can find a way to get there.
And you know, most of us, of course, I grew up, was poor, you know, out in the country. In fact, my dad was sick most of my college career and died during my college career. And so I had to pretty well make my own way. When I retired from selling real estate last year, and I'd kind of, at that time, began to think back what I had done. Started work on the farms out there in the country at age 14, and I mentioned to someone, from that age until I retired last year at the end of June, I'd either had a job or was going to school full time during that 63 years.
I was sitting around the other day talking to some people my age, and when I was a kid, I started working when about 12. I was a caddy, paper boy, pin setter at the bowling alley, and worked in a shoe repair shop, which I don't. Every job I had from the time I was drafted, every job I had as a kid is gone.
Yeah.
They're not there.
Well, we live in a throwaway society, don't we?
Isn't it?
But all those students and the young adults out there watching this, I mean, there's something that you can do to help you achieve your goal. If these young athletes, if they're talented in golf, they want to work at golf or tennis, cross country, track, music, regardless of what it is, if they dedicate themselves for it, they can achieve. And every year, as a school board member, I ask the high school principal to get us a list of all the students the high school seniors who receive scholarships to colleges, regardless of what it's in. And it's amazing how many students we have that have worked hard enough in the fine arts or athletics or academic work to achieve scholarships. And that's a tremendous help through college, because it's extremely difficult for the parents this day and age to afford to put their children through college, even if the kids are working in the summertime and on the weekends and whatever. It's hard for them to get through college debt-free. It's just almost impossible unless they have a lot of scholarship help. And there's opportunities out there. They just have to pursue them, and they just have to try to dedicate themselves toward achieving.
Well, our scholarship, the North Lawrence Scholarship Program, gives out
Right, sure.
100,
Yeah.
100 or more people.
You brought another blast from the past, if you will, here.
I did.
The senior cords.
Well,
in the Letterman jacket.
Yeah. Whether you were from Heltonville or Tunnelton or Shawswick or Mitchell or wherever, through high school, of course, you always look forward to becoming a senior. And back in the, I don't know when this started, maybe the 40s. I know it was in existence.
It was back in the 30s.
Really?
Yeah,
30s?
30, 37, 38.
Okay.
I had a pair.
Yeah.
In 43, I remember.
So that's pretty unique. Someone came up with the idea of senior cords. That's what they were called, senior cords.
I think it was Sam Bernard, had Sherman and Bernard clothing store down on the square.
Well, it was a good sales pitch.
That may have been the guy that promoted it.
But anyway, sort of of course, these are from the 60s, and the mice have been in them. But the student would buy the cords, and if they were artistic, they would draw cartoon characters or hot rod cars or whatever on there. And if they were from a school that was fairly small, they would put the names of all their classmates on the cords. And they would wear them to school. They would wear them to sporting events, and so on and so forth. And they took a lot of pride in those, and this was kind of the signification that you were a senior.
You're a senior. You better not wear them if you're not a senior.
Right,
Somebody take them off of you.
Because you may go home with no trousers on. Now, I remember Maxine Cruzy. She was a very good artist, and she did a lot of those for kids around the Avoca and Olytic and Needmore area. She enjoyed it, and, she just charges, I don't know, $4 or $5 or whatever. But a lot of kids who were boyfriend, girlfriend, they would put, their names in a loving heart there and so on and so forth. And, of course, after it was on there, it was on there. And, of course, they might have broken up a month later, but still that was on their senior cards.
Or you could paint a picture over it.
Yeah.
Paint something else over it.
Yeah. So it seemed as though those were popular just in this area, because I know when our senior class went to Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia and New York and so on and so forth, senior cords didn't exist on those other senior groups who came in to visit those historical sites.
Well, Sam knew what he was doing, didn't he?
He knew what he was doing. So we wore those, and of course, sometimes the trend was to just not even try to clean them, just wear them until they got
Yeah, that was
grimy.
another thing. You could wear them just forever.
Yeah.
Can't wash them, Mom, because they'll fade it.
Yeah. Your Letterman jacket. This is really ornate. It's leather.
It is.
And I know at the Lawrence County Museum, I noticed that Dean Arthur's letter jacket is in there representing Needmore.
Really?
When I went
Yeah,
through
yeah.
the museum here recently. But you don't see the Letterman's jackets like this anymore, I don't think.
What year is that?
That's a 61.
61.
Now, when I graduated, it wasn't jackets, it was sweaters.
Sweaters. Yeah.
Letterman sweater, yes.
Yeah,
In
that.
fact, I still got mine. I couldn't get in it, but I still.
But up through freshman through junior year, if you were lettered in a varsity sport, whether it was track or whatever it was, you would just get a letter with nothing on it, maybe except the decal. but I'm sure the Tunnelton runners and players got a red or a white T, and I'm sure the Fayetteville boys got a blue or white F. And then when you got to be a senior, you could sew all those letters on there and all the patches that maybe your team had accumulated. And of course, we wore these with great pride.
Then there was a stripe on there, a bar for each year you'd played on the team.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It had all identification for you.
Yeah, I see like 2 stripes for cross country, 4 for basketball, 1 for baseball.
Some of the
He was busy,
schools,
wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
some of the larger schools probably had sweaters maybe that they gave their freshmen or JV players. I'm not sure. And then maybe they got their leather jacket when they were seniors. But now I think maybe the first time a boy lettered or a girl letters, they may get a sort of a windbreaker type jacket, I think.
My granddaughters both got them. Yeah.
And then I guess they get
From
their,
here, they got them both from here. One was a volleyball and the other was golf.
when they were underclassmen.
Underclassmen.
Yeah. So it's good to see those, and the kids wear them with pride, and rightly so. And I think it gives younger students an incentive to work harder to get their reward, like they see the
And
other
he
older
just
kids wear.
talked about granddaughters. You think about it, there was a lot of families involved in the sports. You had like you and your brother. I remember there were the Deckard brothers played at Heltonville,
Yeah.
The Skillman brothers at Fayetteville, and I'm sure there was plenty more around the county that
Sure, yeah.
were related like that.
Don't they have scholarship jackets now? They also have scholarship jackets, I think,
Well, I don't know.
I don't know that.
or sweaters. When I was back in '43, I graduated in England, by the way. I wasn't at Bedford High School when I graduated. I got my diploma in England. But in '43, they gave me a Old English B for being on the Pioneer Yearbook.
Yeah.
I wasn't an athlete. I was working on the Pioneer, but I had an Old English B to put on the sweater. But they didn't give me the sweater. They just gave me the letter.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a wonderful program. It truly has, and I've really enjoyed having you guys on here, and I can't say enough. I'm just totally impressed here. 112 years of educational experience in the various schools around the area. Appreciate you all taking the time to come on to the Indiana History Project and giving us information that is beneficial today for the children of today, encouraging them to go to college.
I think all three of us would agree that we all loved what we were doing at the time. And of course, the old saying is, if you love what you're doing, you never have to go to work. We did not, I did not, and I'm sure they did not look at their teaching or their principalship as work. We looked at it as something we enjoyed doing and wanted to do for the kids, for the communities. And we actually, we put our hearts and souls into it. And I think I can speak for these two gentlemen. We all three enjoyed what we were doing the last year just as equally as much as we did when we first started our careers.
A little better, in fact.
Yeah.
It got better as it went along.
Yeah. But I think in a lot of employment places, people can't wait to retire, and they get bitter and grumpy and so on and so forth. But I don't think we didn't do that. We enjoyed up to the very last minute.
Another thing about us, all of us, we worked ourselves to get to where we are. In other words, it wasn't all given to us
Right.
along the line. We spent many hours pushing ourselves to get through college and so forth. It wasn't an easy task financially, I'm sure, but it wasn't for me anyway.
That's important. Like you said, you persevered, and it was a labor of love, it sounds like, yeah. Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being on here. Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Holmes,
Well,
thank you very
for having
much.
us.
And enjoyed it.
Lee, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Appreciate your input on this show. This is Brad Bough, along with Lee Hutchinson, thanking you for watching the Indiana History Project and reminding you to like us on Facebook, and also reminding you that if you love your freedom, be sure to thank a veteran. So long, everybody, and we'll see you next time.